When the Greeks fought with the Persians, the Greeks founded a colony in Italy. Another front developed there. The Greeks who settled there got into fights with the Carthaginians. This is how the legend arose that the Persians and Carthaginians were working together. But the Greeks had an idea. A trick. The Greeks had a problem with the Carthaginians and the Latins had a problem with women. So the Greeks settled women in a village. When this village was discovered by the Latins living there, these Latins came and kidnapped the women. When the Greeks later went to the Latins and wanted the women back, the Latins did not want them. So the Greeks in turn wanted to fight with the Latins for the women. The Latins wanted this too. But the Greek women did not want that. So the Greeks had the Latins as cousins, and the new Latin cousin could help the Greeks with their problem with the Carthaginians. There is also another account of the Sabines in the histories of the natives, which states that a colony of Lacedaemonians settled among them when Lycurgus, guardian of his nephew Eunomus, delivered his laws to Sparta. For so the story goes, some of the Spartans, disliking the severity of his laws and separating themselves from the rest, left the city altogether, and, after being borne through a wide stretch of sea, swore to the gods that they would settle in the first city they should reach, for a longing for some country came over them. At last they made that part of Italy which lies near the Pomentine Plain, and called the place where they first landed, in remembrance of their journey through the sea, and built a temple to the goddess Feronia, to whom they had made their vows. This goddess they now called Feronia. And some of them went out from there and settled among the Sabines. For this reason, they say, many of the habits of the Sabines are Spartan, especially their love of war and their frugality and austerity in all the actions of their lives. But that is enough about the Sabine race. When Rome was founded, there were at first 2 kings, as was customary in Sparta. But with the establishment of the Republic and the formation of the Senate, Rome took a different direction. In the 5th century BC, allegedly 451, the laws applicable to Roman citizens were recorded on 12 tablets, following the example of the Greeks. Rome had probably played an important role in the Latium region before the 6th century BC. How important this was is also disputed. After the establishment of the Republic, a policy of expansion began, which at first probably resulted mostly from military defense against a perceived external threat. The decisive turning point from defense to expansion, according to later tradition, was the sack of the city in 387 BC. AD after the Dies Irae, which was glorified as a black day and a warning. From now on, the goal was no longer just defense, but also the final victory over the attackers and their subjugation. The Romans, however, always viewed negotiated peace as only temporary. In peace negotiations with conquered enemies, however, the Romans usually proved to be flexible and usually concluded alliances, fodera, with the recently defeated opponents on acceptable terms. The foederati or socii, allies, had to pay taxes and fight for Rome from then on, but in return received a share of the movable booty. The upper classes of the allied communities could acquire Roman citizenship quite easily. However, a defection from Rome was mercilessly punished. In this way, Roman power grew continuously through the newly acquired allies among the Italic tribes in central Italy. The subjugated people were not allowed to form alliances with each other, so that the empire, according to the principle of divide and conquer, was a system of bilateral treaties oriented towards Rome. However, the recognized weakness of a city or region was also exploited in order to conquer it and incorporate it into the Roman sphere of influence, as was the case with the Etruscan city of Veii in 396 BC. The defeated opponents were treated far more ruthlessly, the population was enslaved, and their property was distributed among the Roman citizens. After a good 100 years of expansion, the small republic suffered a serious setback on the aforementioned Dies Irae in 390 or 387 BC, when Rome was taken and plundered by the Gallic Senans. In the 5th century BC, Celtic peoples set out from what is now France. A group of Senans crossed the Alps and settled in the Po Valley together with the Incibers, Boii, and Cenomanians, where they defeated the Etruscans several times. They inhabited the area near Ariminum, Rimini, and Ancona. At the beginning of the 4th century BC, Celtic warriors under King Brennus V. Victus advanced southwards over the Apennine mountain range and conquered Rome in 387 BC. With the exception of the capital, the sacred geese of Juno are said to have warned the defenders with their cackling, and only withdrew after months of siege in return for the payment of a ransom. The involvement of the Senans in the campaign against Rome is disputed, but not their centuries-long hostility towards Rome. This experience immediately had an impact on the policies of the young republic. Rome then rearmed and soon expanded to the south and north. The Samnites were defeated in hard and protracted battles between 343 and 290 BC, and their territory was incorporated into the Roman sphere of influence in the so-called Samnite Wars. The Etruscans, on the other hand, who had previously dominated the area north of Rome and whose power was in decline, were subjugated to Roman power in barely concealed wars of aggression. In the period after 340 BC, the Romans succeeded in bringing most of the cities in the Latium region under Roman control in the Latin Wars. In 285 BC, they attacked the Etruscan Arretium, Arezzo. The Romans who rushed to help them suffered a defeat. The Sun chief Britomaris then allied himself with the Etruscans against the Romans, but the consul Publius Cornelius Dolabella led a strong army into their territories. In 283 BC, while the Sun army was marching on Rome, the Romans occupied their tribal territory and deliberately killed women, children, and the elderly. The Romans then defeated the Senonian army and founded the colony of Gallica, today Senegalia, on their territory. The last remaining Senans were immediately expelled from Italy. From around 280 BC, the Romans also subjugated southern Italy, where Greeks had already settled centuries before, against the Epirot king Pyrrhus. To secure their rule, the Romans established several colonies. Rome also established an alliance system with several cities and tribes, including the Samnites, who had been subdued in tough battles. In the meantime, a hereditary nobility had formed, the patricians. From the 4th century BC, however, wealthy plebeians fought for more and more rights and access to various offices in the course of the so-called class struggles. It is significant that these offices offered the respective people the opportunity to gain prestige, but at the same time required them to channel their personal ambitions in a way that was also useful to the community. Unlike in Greece, the view that aristocrats could only gain rank and prestige through active service to the state prevailed. At the end of the conflicts, a new republican aristocracy emerged, the nobility, which consisted of patricians and upwardly mobile plebeian families. Although dynastic thinking continued to play a role, this new upper class saw itself primarily as a meritocracy and competed to be elected to high office by the people. The prestige and power of a senator was now largely determined by the positions he had held in the state. The hunger for prestige of many nobles can be seen as a characteristic of the Roman Republic, which was to prove a heavy burden, especially during the Republic's time of crisis, when the rivalry could no longer be channeled and escalated into civil war. There were full Roman citizens from the city of Rome, the colonies, or incorporated tribes, communities with Roman citizenship but without voting rights, and allies who were able to maintain their internal autonomy. This alliance system became the cornerstone of what is now called the Roman Empire.